Alrighty. Why don't we go ahead and jump in? I know it's last session of the day on a lovely Tuesday here in Melbourne, and I appreciate you all joining me. My name is Kyle Winters. I am a technical advocate with the Learning and Certifications team at Cisco. I take a focus on security, and I've worn many different hats across security over the years, whether it's a solutions architect, software engineer, systems administrator, business development. I've worked with Cisco for 6 years and made a return recently, and I was with various different application security startups since then, during that time as well too. Today I want to talk to you about malware, and this being DevNet, I thought it'd be fun if we actually cracked open some malware as well and took a look at some of the source code. So we're going to start just by making sure that everybody has a same understanding of what malware is and the different types of malware that exist. We'll quickly cover a brief history of malware and some of the different types and how the trends have changed over time, and then take a look at the current landscape of malware as well too. Then we'll really dive into some source code and take a look at some common malware behaviors and techniques and some of the code that can be used to evoke those. And we'll actually go into a case study where we'll crack open the Ryuk ransomware and take a look at how it actually works and functions on a source code level. We'll close out by covering some different tools that can be used for malware analysis and defense as well, so that way you feel like you're equipped with the skills needed to effectively detect and mitigate ransom or any kind of malware, really. There is a WebEx Teams room that's available. Unfortunately, they did not put the name in there, but it is the session number. I can get that all to you later if you'd like to join, but feel free to ask any questions that may come up in there as well. And just a quick disclaimer, for legal liability reasons, this information used in a malicious way can be very dangerous. I definitely do not advise, unless you have proper authorization or you're in a authorized lab environment to do some of these things. There's some very powerful techniques that can be used here and can cause a lot of damage and put you in legal risk. So don't say you heard these techniques from me, but if you're doing it in a nice, safe environment and you have the right approval, by all means, please have fun with it. So, to begin, understanding malware, just so we all have the same definition of what malware is, it's short for malicious software. I think that's a no-brainer. But really, it's any kind of software that's intentionally designed to cause damage, disruption, whatever it may be to a computer server, network, system. So it's really, has a lot of different functionalities and purposes. Sometimes it's there to disrupt normal operations, steal information, or gain restricted access to different types of systems. And not all malware is the same. We hear these terms oftentimes interchangeably, but they have different definitions to them as well. The viruses are a common one that we see, and that's really just a malicious piece of code that attaches itself to a clean file and spreads to other clean files. But worms are a very common one as well too, especially when it comes to moving laterally across the network, and those are able to replicate themselves and spread very quickly. You have Trojans. Those are, think of the Trojan horse. It looks like it's not malicious software, but under the hood it is. If anybody remembers LimeWire back in the day, we've probably encountered a Trojan at some point in our lives. There's also ransomware. I'm sure that one makes the news all the time, and that's typically intended to encrypt files for extortion purposes. You've got spyware that's spying on people and tracking what they do, adware, that's the unwanted advertisements that you can get, and there's more as well too. To kind of give you the typical life cycle of a malware attack, it oftentimes starts with reconnaissance. So a malicious actor will be gathering information about the target so that way they can make sure that they get their malicious code in the right places, and then becomes that initial delivery and infection. From there, typically the payload of the malware is executed in that execution stage, and there's some level of persistence that occurs to make sure that that malware can continue to exist inside of whatever system it's living on. Then you typically have some kind of command and control function. That's where that piece of malware is communicating with some remote system out there, getting instructions or sharing information back and forth. And what good malware wouldn't want to move laterally and infect more hosts across the system as well? So that's where that lateral movement comes in. Privilege escalation is also a very common stage. If you're a user like me, you might not have the same level of access as an admin user, so being able to get that admin level access is where privilege escalation comes in. And really, there's ultimately always some goal that you're trying to achieve with malware, and that's where that actions on objective piece is, whether it's data exfiltration or encrypting data for some ransomware type attack. And lastly, cleanup. You always want to kind of cover your tracks from a malware perspective. You want to evade detection, and that's where that comes in. Typical sequence that malware might undergo, it could start with just a simple email. Maybe it's well tailored, maybe it tries to get you to click on a link, but that's a very common starting point. Not always the only one, but a very common one. And once that email link is clicked on, it might make a DNS request out to some kind of questionable site, and then from there, it's essentially leads to some kind of strange process. So it's making this request out, it's pulling in some information, it's making some kind of process that is a bit of anomaly type behavior, and then from there, it's essentially affected your computer, and that process will then connect to some other type of system that's out there. Maybe it's going to steal data, as an example, or encrypt data. It can use various different stages, and I'll talk about some of those different stages of the attack kill chain here shortly. But now that we kind of have a similar understanding of malware, just to kind of give you some background on some well-known malware that's been out there, let's start with the beginning, the Morris worm. This was built and released in 1988 by this gentleman here. I forget his first name. His last name is Morris, though. It is named after him. It's part of his legacy. He did serve time in jail for doing this. But back in the day, this was really one of the first worms that was distributed across the internet. And back then, it was 6,000 computers, which doesn't sound like a significant number, but back then, that was a significant number. So this is really kind of that first piece of malicious code that was able to replicate itself and spread across the internet at that time. From there, things started to becoming a bit more sophisticated and complex. You have things like the SQL Slammer as an example, which was another rapidly spreading worm. It was leveraging a vulnerability inside of Microsoft SQL, and it would really be very effective in infecting different types of systems. I mean, in the first 10 minutes, 75,000 systems were infected when this came into release. So it's a very valuable one. It disrupted a lot of ATM services, airline ticketing. But really, the goal of it at this time was really just disruption in a lot of cases. And that's where things kind of start to change a little bit. You look at like the Zeus Trojan as an example, and things are starting to become a bit more targeted. Now we're starting to target things like financial systems as an example, and being able to actually take money. This is where malware is now becoming a profitable business for these malicious actors. And this Zeus Trojan did a lot of damage. It stole really millions of dollars from different individuals and organizations by gaining unauthorized access to bank accounts. It was kind of a keystone moment in the world of malware. And things continue to evolve and change from there even further. Stuxnet is a great example of that, and this is where we start to see a bit of state-sponsored type attacks happening and things that are focused on governments now. How can we use malware as a component of a cyber war that is brewing? So this really caused a lot of disruption for Iran and their nuclear sites. And it shows kind of now things like operational technology can also be targeted as part of malware as well too. Moving forward, we have things like Emotet, and this is a great one just because it started off as kind of a sophisticated banking Trojan, but now it's kind of used as a stepping stone for a lot of other malware that's out there today. And we're going to talk about the Ryuk ransomware in a little bit. That's leveraging Emotet as well as part of it. And it's just kind of starting to see the evolution of malware. Now you can leverage one piece of malware to invoke another piece of malware. And another great one, WannaCry, everybody remembers this one. Huge disruption. Now we're starting to see ransomware as a trend, and things are starting to become more motivated by strong financial things, extortion, all of that as well. And moving into what the modern day and age looks like, we're starting to see more of these supply chain attacks that are happening, like what occurred at SolarWinds as well too, and being able to infiltrate the software development supply chain and install malware before it even gets out into production is kind of where a trend of things is going. That's why software supply chain security is becoming very popular. So let me take a sip of water really quick. You're starting to see, though, kind of how malware has evolved over time, and that kind of brings us to the present day of where we're at right now when it comes to malware. It's become significantly more sophisticated. It's employing a lot of different advanced evasion techniques such as polymorphism, fileless attacks, even sometimes zero-touch attacks as well too. It becomes a lot more targeted as well. I mean, we would think of spear phishing as an example of a very targeted attack, but people are doing this oftentimes. It's not like a cast a wide net and see what happens. People are becoming very sophisticated and attacking people and organizations with a specific purpose. And you're starting to see things like malware as a service emerging as well too. And it's a profitable business, malware, and sometimes malicious actors, bad organizations, they want to take advantage of that and be able to leverage malware for their own purposes. And you can go on the dark web and find different types of malware as a service offerings to be able to purchase with cryptocurrency today. I don't recommend that you do that, but it's out there. The thing too is that threats are becoming a lot more frequent, and this is just a chart from a couple years ago of a lot of different types of attacks that occurred, and it all varies in their sophistication and what they're trying to do, but there's just a constant growing stream of attacks that continuously grows year over year. These people are constantly adapting their practices, they're getting smarter, and they're becoming more sophisticated and more frequent as well. And if you take a look at the landscape of cybersecurity operations teams, one quick statistic here, 4.45 million US dollars is the average cost of a cybersecurity breach last year. 55% of security teams are missing critical alerts. There's a movement that's occurring in the cloud, and 45% of security breaches are occurring in cloud infrastructure as well. And 51% say that their current tools are struggling to detect these types of advanced threats. So the problem is becoming more constant, and tools are having a harder time being able to keep up with this as it's rapidly evolving as well. If we take a look at the impact on a global scale for next year, what's projected, $10.5 trillion is the global cost of malware attacks. That's a significant number. It's trillion, 10.5 trillion, like wild number to think about. And really the reason that a lot of these things are happening, why it costs so much, it could be the financial losses that occur with things like ransomware. WannaCry created $4 billion of financial losses globally, but it also leads to operational disruption and reputational damage that could impact the bottom line of a business as well. And you know, the problem with a lot of these things is that endpoints, they're the most common attack, but they're not always the things that's picking it up. You know, remote endpoints are being used more frequently. Security teams have manual workflows oftentimes still that require 2 times the personnel to be able to administer their things compared to automation. There's things that we're doing as an industry that are shifting to improve our detection capabilities, such as deploying endpoint detection and response systems, moving towards automation to be able to be more fast and effective in catching these things. But these attackers are often one step ahead of us, unfortunately. So one thing we can do is educate ourselves on the way that attackers are leveraging malware and some of these techniques that they're using. That way, if we do come across these things when we're looking at data, whether it's from a threat hunting or forensics perspective, we know what we have that knowledge and we're able to identify those things a little bit more effectively. So I want to take you through the attack kill chain and share with you some kind of common malware behaviors and techniques that many pieces of malware use today. Let's start with that initial compromise, and everybody's seen those phishing emails. Maybe there are tests that are coming in, maybe it's a live one that's come in before. There's a lot of ways that initial compromise can happen, whether it's drive-by downloads, exploiting some kind of vulnerability where you can hit in a specific endpoint and be able to upload malware that way. It could even be malvertising. I mean, if I wanted to get KeePass as a password store, maybe I'm going to click on that first sponsored link there. Would anybody else click on that link there? Looks a little suspicious, right? That's because if you actually looked at it, there's a non-UTF-8 character there. And if you click on that and you download KeePass there, you're actually downloading malware that's in disguise. So things like this are becoming very sophisticated, and being able to use things like Google's ad engine to hit a wide audience becomes very effective for these malicious actors. Now, when you're looking at code as well too, and you're analyzing code in the sandbox, code obfuscation is a very common thing that people are doing as well too, whether it's encrypting their actual code, encoding it in something like base64 as an example. They can do a lot of different things, for example, using dead code. Polymorphism is a great example as well too. If you're not familiar with polymorphism is, that's where the actual source code changes every time that you run it. So it's difficult for these types of analysis engines to track it because it's constantly evolving and changing. So in this particular example here, you might look at this string and think it's a jarbled bunch of nonsense, but when it's actually decoded, you can see it's actually doing some kind of functionality there, and it's hitting some kind of weird, suspicious endpoint. You wouldn't notice that just by looking at this here, but when it's all put together via the regex expression, that's what's actually going on there. So a great way to hide what you're actually doing, and if you're using some kind of static analysis tool, you might not catch that right away. Persistence is also an important part of malware. You want to make sure that if you're running malware, if you're a malicious person, that continues to run while you need it to do what it needs to do. And there's various different ways that persistence can occur, whether it's modifying registry keys or using scheduled tasks like cron jobs. So right up here is a great example of a registry key that was updated. It's where every time that piece of that operating system turns on, now it's going to actually run that malware every single time, and that might be difficult for some people to find. You can hide things in cron jobs as well too, and be able to, let's say, for example, every minute initiate a reverse SSH shell. That way you can essentially maintain that communication from your command and control back to whatever endpoint is infected. So this is a great mechanism to keep that persistence, keep your malware in there, and keep that communication going. Lateral movement is also important. I think you infect one host, you want to infect as many hosts as possible, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. Whether it's things like remote desktop protocol, RDP abuse, having some kind of worm-like behavior, or infecting Windows admin shares as an example. That's a great way to do it. You could also do things like credential dumping and be able to read what those credentials are across whatever that system's interacted with, and then leverage those credentials to infiltrate other systems as well. This example here is just a simple one. It's going to scan a subnet and essentially initiate a thread for every target that it's seen on that subnet and evoke that malware the same way that it got into that initial host that was compromised. Command and control is also oftentimes important, and I find this one to be very interesting because there's a lot of different ways that command and control can occur. I mean, on its own, command and control is really about beaconing, having some kind of communication from some remote person out there who's trying to drive behavior or control data across these systems. And this can be done a lot of different ways. It can be done through simple HTTPS or HTTP connections. It can be done by DNS tunneling or peer-to-peer requests. It could even be done using social media platforms. I've actually seen this before as well, where a piece of malware will reach out to Twitter and it'll look for a specific Twitter account. And whatever that Twitter account has posted recently is some kind of command behavior for that malware to run. It might be something that's encrypted or base64 encoded, but when that piece of malware reaches out to Twitter, Twitter becomes now a mechanism for that malware to communicate with the infected hosts that are out there. And it's a very interesting and unique way, I think, to drive that command and control behavior. Another one is obviously data exfiltration. Many people run malware to try to steal data, whether it's sensitive data, PII, whatever it could be. And there's a lot of ways to extract that data. Some simple ones can include things like key logging as an example, file exfiltration over HTTP or FTP as an example. But one that I find very interesting here is actually leveraging DNS to do exfiltration. And you can see what's happening here is this code on the right side here, it's got this DNS server, exfil.c2server.com. And kind of a sneaky way of doing it. What this piece of code is going to do is going to make a DNS lookup onto that DNS server. And you see this string right here, what it's going to do is essentially encrypt or encode that particular string. That's a piece of data that it's trying to exfiltrate. So it's constantly making these DNS queries that have bogus data there. Those aren't obviously any kind of website that's going to be hit, but when that DNS server sees this come in, and it's that malicious DNS server, it knows that it needs to pull that, log that information, and then decrypt that, and now that's the data that's being exfiltrated over DNS. So a very kind of unique, cool way to be able to extract data using a non-conventional approach such as DNS. That's why it's great to be having some kind of DNS tool that can look for suspicious types of requests like that going out, because if you see something like that happening on your network, that's a good indicator that there could be something malicious going on there. Many pieces of malware as well want to cause some kind of disruption, destroy some piece of data. Things like ransomware is a great example, and that's where this kind of piece of code comes in here. There's many different ways that destruction or disruption can occur. It could be data wiping as an example. Denial of service attacks is a great example as well too. Ransomware is obviously a very common and trendy one these days, and it could be as simple as just reading every file that's in a directory, walking that directory, and for every file that exists in there, encrypt it and do some kind of fancy encryption on it that can be very complicated and hard to decrypt. We'll take a look at that in the Ryuk ransomware case study that we're going to present here shortly, but that's a very common tactic that people use as well too. And last one I want to talk about is evasion techniques, because when you're writing malware, you don't want to be caught. And you want your malware to be able to run successfully and complete whatever mission or objective that you're trying to get it to do. And there's a lot of different ways that it can evade these different types of detection services. It could be disabling different security tools as an example, or deleting log files. In these particular examples that you see here, there's two different ones that are occurring that are ultimately looking to see if it's a VM possibly that's running. So the first one is actually taking a look at the hardware and checking the disk size and the total memory. And if it's a low number of memory, that could be an indication that this is a VM or a sandbox running, and it's going to exit if it thinks that it's too small of a disk size. Same thing with this one down here below too. It's looking at the number of CPUs that are running on that host that's infected. And if it's got, less than two or so CPUs, that could be an indication that this isn't actually a real endpoint. Many times they're running 8, 16, even more. So if it sees a very low number of CPUs that are running, go ahead and exit. Don't even run that malware, because that's just going to get you caught. So this is a common practice that many people do as well too when it comes to malware. So we've learned some of these different types of techniques. Let's go ahead and crack open an actual piece of malware now, that Ryuk ransomware, and take a look at how it actually is doing this. Take a look at its source code and how it's actually running and implemented. And if you're not familiar with the Ryuk ransomware, it was first observed in 2018. It's associated with a criminal group linked to Russian crime. It really is, your kind of your classic piece of malware. It's leveraging, and I'll go through kind of the attack kill chain of it here next. But it really did a lot of damage. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars of Bitcoin being extracted, and it's a common one that people see as part of ransomware as a service as well. Especially as things kind of evolve in that space. This was one of those kind of early ransomware pieces that was oftentimes used and sold on the dark web. And just to kind of give you an idea of how this attack kill chain works, it oftentimes starts with that phishing email. And inside of that phishing email, there'll be a doc that you click on. And when you click on that, there's a macro that runs that's going to essentially invoke a PowerShell function. That's going to reach out there, download Emotet, the one that I talked about earlier. That's going to kind of be the jumping off point. Emotet's then going to grab some additional playbooks, often things like TrickBot as an example. And from there, it's going to actually perform a lot of different functionality leveraging that TrickBot ransomware or malware. It's going to do things like disable antivirus services. It's going to harvest data, and it's going to steal credentials. And then from there, it calls back to its command and control server back at home, and it drops that Ryuk ransomware payload. So it starts with that phishing email. It does the necessary stuff it needs to get to the point where it can disable antivirus, harvest data, and steal credentials, and then it does that ransomware piece of encrypting your files and generating that ransom note. So It really starts once you click on that macro, once you click on that infected doc file, it starts with the dropper. And this can be a 32 or 64-bit payload. This is kind of really the jumping off point that's going to check the system and say, what kind of system is this? Which piece of our version of our malware do we need to run to get this going? It's going to drop some files in there as well too, and just kind of kick off the process for you. From there, though, once that process started, really persistence becomes the next stage. And how do we make sure that we can continue to run this malware without being caught, or if the system shuts down, allowing it to start back up again? So in this particular case, it's using registry keys to achieve that persistence, using a very well-known common one right there. It goes ahead and edits that registry key, and you can see it's adding that information there in this bottom line there. That's an actual piece from that PowerShell script that it's running there. So it creates that persistence, and then it jumps into privilege escalation. And the Ryuk ransomware uses adjust token privileges function to adjust the process, the process's security access tokens. So there's this privilege name called SE debug privilege, and that's oftentimes required to debug different things. Many other things might use it. But it can also adjust the memory of the process that's owned to another account. So it's actually a very powerful, commonly used one in the malware world to kind of gain privilege escalations. And you can see, grabbing that, it can adjust those the tokens and the permissions for other things related to the ransomware process as well too. It'll then do process injection, so it's going to actually enumerate through all the processes that are running on that infected host already, and it's going to look for things where it can inject additional processes into existing running processes. So that way it becomes harder to detect. If you see some kind of process that's running that you think is suspicious, that's going to alert you. But if you inject it into an existing running process by grabbing its process ID and finding one where you can add some additional processes into it, then it becomes harder to detect that. So it's taking a look here at what are all the processes running, which are the ones that we can leverage to inject some additional processes into, and be able to run through the rest of our necessary steps to complete this malware attack. We also want to kill certain processes as well when this ransomware is running. That way we can avoid detection, and some of that includes things like disabling antivirus software, things like McAfee is an example as well. But it's also going to kill the processes of other things that it's eventually going to encrypt as well too, or leverage. So if it wants to, let's say for example, encrypt a bunch of Word documents or a SQL database, it's actually going to kill those processes. That way they're not running, and it can essentially do its encryption at that point in time as well. So it's not competing and overwriting itself. So it kills all of those necessary processes for all the things that it is going to eventually attack. It actually kills 40 different processes and 180 different services. So it's doing a lot to shut things down there. It also deletes backups too, because when you're doing ransomware, you want to avoid people easily being able to back things up. So it's looking for shadow copies and different types of backups, and it's going through and actually deleting all of those as well, so that way there's no easy path for the system administrator to just back up to a previous version of it. So very sophisticated, this Ryuk ransomware, and what it's doing here in terms of being able to get persistence, delete the necessary things to avoid detection, and make it very difficult for any kind of recovery process to occur. That's really what the malicious actor wants, is to make it incredibly difficult for that person to really motivate them to want to pay that ransom. And once you've kind of done all this setup, that's really where that encryption process comes in. So Ryuk uses multi-threaded encryption, so it's encrypting multiple different files all at the same time, which allows it to be very, very fast. There are certain types of files like executables that it does skip over, but it's using a very strong piece of encryption, and it's breaking it into different chunks that are about 1 million bytes in size and splitting that up in different ways. It then adds a little piece of metadata at the end of it as well too, that it can use to identify itself as which files it encrypted as part of this. It's actually a great indicator of compromise as well as to what type of attack it is.
This evening. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Don't forget to check your schedule and join us for Center Stage and Content Corner sessions running throughout the day in the hub.
All right.
The rest of your evening.
So you can see actually here's a piece of that metadata as an example of that encrypted file, and you can see that line that says Hermes there, Hermes. That's kind of the initial start of that metadata tag. So if you see that line in the last 274 bytes of a file, that's a great indication that it was tied to this Ryuk ransomware. It also doesn't just encrypt the files on the local host, it actually takes a look out at the network shares as well too. This is an example of that source code right there where it's looking out at which network shares does it have an open connection with, iterating through those, and then performing encryption on those as well too. So many devices are obviously connected to the network, and having that network share now encrypted exacerbates the overall impact of that ransomware. And lastly, before it gives you that ransom note, it does establish some command and control functions. This allows for you to deliver additional payloads if you want. It also allows to send the encryption keys back and forth however you need it. It's a way for when that ransom is paid, that malicious actor can then reach back out to that host and either decrypt its files or burn everything down to the ground and make a run for it. Whatever they decide they want to do. And hopefully you never have to see a note like this though, because if you do see a note like this, that means everything that I just shared with you, it's done all of that. All of your files are now encrypted and they want money from you. And there'll oftentimes be some kind of email. It could be a rotating email. It could look like somebody's email who you might even know. But when you see a note like this and all of a sudden you have all these mysteriously encrypted files on your device, that's not a good sign. So that's just an example of that ransom note that you might encounter. Hopefully you never have to encounter that though. And that's just their way to essentially extort you for money. So all of this done to steal data, of course, as well, steal credentials, but really oftentimes with the ransomware attacks, it's all about getting money out of people. And this is what all that work goes towards, is this note right here to get you to pay that Bitcoin. So what can we do to defend against this? I mean, there's a lot of different techniques. I think patching your systems is an obvious one. Network segmentation is a great practice though. If you segment your network in an effective way, that's going to prevent a lot of spread of things like worms as an example, or these types of attacks moving laterally across your infrastructure. Having a strong backup strategy is a great way to defend against these types of attacks as well, because if you can have a strong backup strategy, you can easily revert back. You never have to pay that ransom then. And leveraging tools like endpoint detection response, that'll allow you to mitigate and quarantine these hosts in real time and prevent them from going through this entire process as well. And just to share some of those tools as an example, there are a lot of tools out there, and Cisco obviously has a few of them to offer. Let's start, for example, on the endpoint itself, Cisco Secure Endpoint. This is a great tool that runs, it used to be called AMP for Endpoints as an example, but it's a single agent that runs on your endpoints. It's feeding that back into some kind of detection response engine, allowing you to monitor that. There's a lot of different things that it's looking for as part of this: file reputations, network traffic, behavioral patterns. It's looking at indicators of compromise. It's doing threat hunting as well. But one really interesting part of Cisco Secure Endpoint is actually Cisco Secure Malware Analytics. And this allows for static and dynamic analysis to occur in a sandbox environment. So if you have some kind of file that's picked up or you download it online, it can go into Cisco Secure Malware Analytics and it'll run it in a sandbox and see, is this actually malicious or not? So that's just one tool on an endpoint level. Many attacks start in email, like I mentioned before. So Cisco Secure Email, ESA, is a great tool as well. This is going to help detect things like phishing emails, malicious domains that are being used. It's a very powerful tool as well to secure your email, because that's oftentimes the entry point and the initial point of compromise for a lot of malicious things. And it can do things like file analysis as well. It can look at the reputations of the URL or the sender to see if they're up to no good elsewhere. It can also prevent against spam too, so a very powerful tool. This one's near and dear to me, formerly StealthWatch, now Cisco Secure Analytics. I used to work on that team as well, and there's a lot of interesting things that it can do from a malware perspective as well. I mean, just taking a look here, this is from the StealthWatch or Secure Network Analytics dashboard. You can see it's very much aligned a lot of these things two different phases of the common attack kill chain. And it can look for things like reconnaissance activity, command and control, DDoS activity. It's very powerful, and one thing that I might not be highlighted on here is that it can actually look for malware in encrypted traffic as well, based off of the different signatures of that traffic. So it's a great tool to detect malware if it's already traversing across your network. XDR is also a great tool. It really kind of encompasses everything together, whether you have these tools or something like Umbrella as an example, and being able to see those malicious domains and block them from even being able to communicate. But XDR really kind of wraps up all of these things together and gives you that effective detection and response mechanism. And it can really incorporate all of these different things. It incorporates Talos as well as part of it. And it gives you a great interface to not just monitor these different types of things, but have playbooks that can automate the response to a lot of these types of malicious behavior as well. And luckily, there's also one package, a suite that has all of these things together. That's Cisco's Breach Protection Suite, and this really gives you XDR, email threat defense, secure endpoint, and secure network analytics all together. So that way, if there's a breach that occurs, it can leverage all of these different things together, whether it's from that initial compromise point in the email, all the way to it's actually now running, performing command and control functions, exfiltrating data out of your network. Being able to see this all in a unified way is really what this Cisco Breach Suite is all about. So, hopefully this was an interesting informational session. I don't think it's every day you get to crack open some malware and actually look at the source code of it. So just to kind of summarize things, we all know what malware is, I think. It's not designed to be used for any kind of good typically. It disrupts operations, steals information. But some of those common behaviors that I showed you today, whether it's code obfuscation, persistence, lateral movement, data exfiltration. Those are all things that hopefully you have some new knowledge and insight into. And like I mentioned, Cisco does offer a suite that protects against many of the different phases of that attack kill chain. So I definitely recommend that you check out that Cisco Breach Protection Suite. But also check out Cisco U as well. It's a free learning resource that's available as part of the Learning and Certifications organization. If you go to u.cisco.com, it's free to sign up. And there's a ton of interesting courses on there. We have some free tutorials that we've released that can teach you how to do some types of attacks on your own. If you want to know how to do a man-in-the-middle attack or how to use Nmap to do reconnaissance, that's all there for you and free to download. And Cisco also recently introduced a certificate in ethical hacking as well. So if you want to really get into it, there's a 70-hour course that's free to take on NetAcad. So you just go to netacad.com and you can take that and take the steps to achieving a certificate in ethical hacking. So hopefully this was a good session for you all. I appreciate you all joining me today. Your feedback's always appreciated. So feel free to fill out those session surveys, and you do 4 of them. Hopefully you've done 4 of them by now. You get a free t-shirt. And enjoy the rest of your time here at Cisco Live as well. Feel free to stop by the Cisco U booth over here, explore some more DevNet sessions, participate in the Capture the Flag, and make the most out of your time here at Cisco Live Melbourne. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it, and looking forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.